codify magic?
For me, the greatest creative technology is the human imagination.
Where's that space for discovery?
So I do think there's an opportunity to start thinking in a different way. I guess we create the conditions for magic.
We are actually in the process of doing that right now, but we can't say anything about it.
Hello and welcome to Keeping It Real with Nuevo, our first issue or edition of our podcast looking into the topics most affecting our industry today. So it's no surprise that our topic today is going to focus on AI, but more specifically looking at brand experiences in the age of AI. So joining me today, I've got two of my colleagues in Nuevo. Firstly, I've got Richard Buchanan on my left. Hello, Rich. Rich heads our creative technologies team that looks after innovation and experience strategy within Nuevo. And then to my right, I've got Correia Da Silva, who is our head of creative intelligence. Karen's team looks after our trends, insights, and research capability here at Nuevo. So I'm going to kick it straight off into our first topic of discussion, looking at how real world versus AI is relating to our worlds. One of the big concerns, issue topics, I think, in our industry as a creative agency is, will AI replace human creativity? And we've talked about it as a creative accelerator, and we've written about the role of humans central to this. But what's your perspective? What do you think's going on with that?
Well, I mean, absolutely, there's a lot of anxiety around this, and you only have to use ChatGPT to know that it's pretty good at, replicating creativity and strategic thinking. I think for me, the greatest creative technology is the human imagination. Right. And what that comes down to is the difference between consciousness and intelligence. I think intelligence is kind of a really specific tool for solving problems, but consciousness is much broader. It's about awareness. It's the dimension that makes us human. So I think, there is definitely something to consider, but ultimately it's an amplifier and it makes people better at what they do. I call it, magic, right? Because it feels that way when it works really, really well. So I guess we create the conditions for magic, right, for brands.
Here's a question for you, Karen. Can you codify magic in that respect? If the algorithm is the logic, as you're describing, I think the intelligence versus the consciousness, do you think that AI will have the ability to get to that replacement, or do you think it's always going to rely on that spark?
So from the lens of semiotics, AI just simply can't get there. And part of that is that language is limited. These are based on large language models. And there's always a large part of human experience that can't be captured in language. It's something that's been studied in psychology and cognitive linguistics and semiotics for hundreds of years now. But from a philosophical lens, there's so much that language cannot replicate, cannot fully represent. And AI can get us part of the way there, but can't be get all of the way there in terms of being able to represent the totality of human experience.
I mean, I put it down to the mystical, right? Like, you can't describe mystical experiences. They exist outside of language. So maybe AI isn't magical, but it can create magic. But I think humans are really mystical. And I think mysticism is something that AI will never be able to be a part of, because that's related to consciousness, not intelligence.
I saw it was a Samsung phone ad recently, actually, and it's someone using their phone to scan a shelf to ask which product that the camera's looking at is the right thing for them, and it's talking back to them in conversational commerce that you talk about a lot in relation to that kind of thing. So are we going to see that, do you think, coming through as a way to sort of, for AI to create brand presence, or do you think that's just not going to happen?
I think on the shopper side, that's really interesting. Like, I worked with the Google Lens team before on thinking about bringing that to market. And a lot of it was about subculture, about being able to connect people to things that they love. And it was that sort of facilitation. Yeah. But I feel like it's more about facilitation than it is about presence. I think when we speak about presence, it's more about what is that power that you give back for people to create within spaces. Yeah. And like, AI is a facilitator, but doesn't create meaning. It sort of enables people, and it's a tool that enables people and gives them a little bit more power. Yeah. But it's not going to be necessarily that meaning maker. People make meaning. AI is the facilitator that allows people to make more meaning.
There was this really interesting paper that the World Advertising Review Council put out recently called The Multiplier Effect. And in that report, it talks about the need for brands to balance out brand building activity and brand performance. And I thought it was really interesting because they used Nike as a case study as a company that had really focused in on brand performance and was starting to potentially lose ground to competitors like Adidas in that context because they didn't have the strength in brand.
Yeah.
When we started to think about AI, obviously it's got the potential to sort of drive a lot of the performance efficiency and things. But do you think there's a flip side of that translates out into the real world that is the space to grow brands and brands that mean purposeful activity for the consumers that they're reaching?
Well, I think there's this really interesting dynamic that we're seeing where AI is accelerating content creation. So there's more content than ever and more personalized content than ever. So people are really seeing things that are relevant to them, that are relevant to their interests. But that is a bit of an issue because brands do need to lead a little bit. There needs to be a sense of discovery in brands. You know, if you're only showing people things they already like, where is that space for brand building to surprise and delight people? So if we're just sort of gesturing to the now and what people want now, we're losing out on helping people to imagine new futures or discover new things.
I mean, the opportunity with AI is it's a creative accelerator, isn't it? You know, and you can segment and you can talk to more people in more relevant ways. So in the same way as Spotify creates an algorithm for your preferences in listening, you know, marketing can create the preferences for your brand. So we end up with thousands of versions of a brand speaking to people in a more relevant way. The challenge is then, what happens when you bring that all back together? And you need to talk to people collectively or in a community or in an experience. How do you overcome that? Do you think that AI is going to create a problem around that, or do you think people will just be whatever?
I think there's a dynamic then between what these things actually produce for people. So we know that we're in this sort of age of escapism that people want to escape. That's where we see a lot of AI content doing quite well because this, you know, the surreal content helps people to feel this escape from the everyday. But then there's this longing that we've seen, you know, across a lot of different avenues, like, you know, the loneliness and such. People are seeking presence. So we have this sort of dynamic that's opening up between people wanting to escape, but then people seeking that sense of presence as well.
I'm laughing now because Rich is always talking about presence.
Oh, it's my so
importance of presence.
Look, I mean, I actually think that visibility is everywhere. And actually the next kind of aspect of that is how do you design for presence? How do you design for being felt, being remembered, being included? And I think the modern kind of brand experience in the age of AI is really understanding where those moments for a brand to really show up are, to really have presence, that kind of feeling that you get when something really connects with you. Right, and how you incorporate that into your life. And presence can show up in any moment of a brand experience, and AI can make that more meaningful.
This whole idea of sort of AI being able to deliver brand messages more effectively in an optimized way is sort of built on this fallacy or this like false assumption of control. Well, now we'll have more control. We can personalize, but it doesn't bring into account the reality that's actually acknowledged in marketing science, which is that your brand doesn't entirely belong to you. There is this aspect of sort of co-creation that's always happening with your brand. And that's why, you know, you have to worry about how your brand shows up in different ways because it can be co-opted in the wrong ways. So, I mean, there is this element of AI being able to accelerate what people currently want, but you know, people are still going to take those brands and, you know, incorporate them into their lives and communities in new ways. And there's some really interesting new innovations in this idea of dynamic brand positioning, of being able to, yes, personalize, but also bring in and acknowledge the co-creation that people are constantly doing with brands. You know, brands don't have as much control as they think they do over how their brand shows up in culture. And it's why we see missteps or, you know, ways that people are misinterpreting marketing.
I'm jumping ahead a little bit because we're going to come on to talk about this, but synthetic data, it creates a sort of a feedback loop where prediction is based on predictability, right? So it happened before, therefore we can do it again. But sort of what you're describing is always moving forward. So you need that kind of source information to ensure that relevance is coming back into your insights in your system to then feed that, even if it's going back out as AI. So I think that is a real challenge area for a lot of brands, because how do you get that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are really aware of the fact that their data is being used more and more right? And it's almost a case of, well, how do I almost obfuscate my behavior so it doesn't get co-opted into some big kind of brand machine? But yeah, I totally get it. And, you know, there is the real worry is that the inherent biases in the people that create the systems ultimately start to affect the way that these synthetic personas start to exhibit or make decisions or even organize around brands. And the brands end up becoming a reflection of the biases in the system rather than the reality of the world.
I mean, maybe this is just me coming from academia before I came into the industry. Data is not complete. You know, data on the world is not complete. Data on psychology is not complete. You know, people are still generating net new knowledge constantly. That's why we have academic journals, for instance, that are discovering new things. There are a million new discoveries about people, about behavior, and about culture that are happening every day. Not all of that's reflected in a generalist AI product that is just working on predictability of past patterns. We're also living in kind of an unprecedented age where people have more access to information than ever. And we're seeing radical changes in people's brains from neuroscience. We're seeing a lot of change in behavior based on this new power that people have been given, sometimes to, you know, deleterious or, you know, bad effects.
I know as a parent even of a teenager that their reaction to AI slop and brain rot and all of the kind of tropes that we hear about in the kind of the marketing and research cycles are leading them to kind of different behaviors to move away from AI. There's a rejection there, especially as they're looking at the kind of impact it's potentially having on their lives, their future careers, all these sorts of things. Do you think there's going to be an attitude towards AI that will have an impact in the way that brands should be thinking about their investments now?
Well, you're already seeing it emerge. People are referring to AI as clanker. Nice one, clanker. Right? It's the same thing they would say, you know, nice one, boomer. Right? So there's a new, there is a language emerging around.
So where's clanker coming from?
From robot.
Like robots.
Right.
So it's this idea that the robot isn't as good as the human imagination. Right. So I think it's emerging, but I think the idea is, you know, emergence. The word itself is designed around you can't predict what can come out of complex situations, right? Like, and I think when you look at data, you look at AI, ultimately what people are trying to do is simplify the world. They're trying to make the world understandable, but the world is too complex. You can't ever account for everything, as Karen's pointed out, right? The data is incomplete. But inside that incomplete data is the things that will always surprise us, the new things. And I think, I don't know what young people are going to rebel against. I know they are going to rebel because that's a characteristic of every generation. You know, that's why we have 7 different social networks, right? No one wants to be on the same social network as their parents, right? But yeah, it's coming and it's going to be exciting to understand how it plays out. I don't know what it is, but I know it's definitely going to happen.
It's a huge field of study. I mean, the study of emerging culture is sort of across sort of, you know, sociology and anthropology is a huge focus and a huge focus actually for many brands on competitive advantage. A lot of brand foundations are really focused on let's understand what comes next. We saw that a lot when brands were chasing virality. It was all about how do we make sure that we are hopping on trends before they crest in culture, before we're that old uncle that's showing up, you know, accidentally parroting the joke a little bit too late. We've been speaking about that J.Crew case study about J.Crew using AI in order to create new content based on its old nostalgic catalogs. Now, people found that to be really inauthentic because the whole push for nostalgia for people is really about being able to connect with this sort of analog or bygone era, this idea of authenticity, of scarcity, of it being something maybe that was printed, that there's only a few copies, has higher value now in this age of nostalgia, not just aesthetically, but also in that idea of exclusivity and gatekeeping. And there's that huge backlash of not just from marketing people. I was looking into it the other day, also from people saying, oh, this isn't something that we'd want a brand to do. We felt, a lot of people felt like they were being tricked. And I think that's part of the biggest issue. It's why on Instagram you have to mark if something is created by AI. And I think one of the greatest kind of counterpoints to that was that recent Stone Island campaign where they were proving that they used real sharks in a shot that was sharks circling their logo, or that they used real stunt people on motorcycles to actually produce that. And they released their behind-the-scenes imagery, and people loved it. It was just incredible content. So beyond the ad itself, that behind-the-scenes, look, we invested in real people, we invested in creativity, was almost better than the ads, you know, in terms of brand building, brand loyalty. Now we'll have to see over time, but it was a huge moment for people saying, hell yeah, Stone Island.
Yeah.
You are actually investing in the real.
Backing realness.
I mean, look at Tom Cruise, right? Like, the Mission Impossible franchise is designed around the fact that Tom Cruise is the person doing the stunts.
Yeah.
I think visual effects are amazing, and they've really helped like produce incredible entertainment. But if you go to the cinema and you're just watching, 90 minutes of a visual effects spectacle, eventually people just become kind of numb to it. So you stack up, Adolescence against a Marvel movie. They both have their own attributes, but one is produced in a way where you can look at it and go, wow, that's an incredibly powerful piece of content, versus, wow, that's an incredible spectacle, but there's no depth. And I think we're beginning to get into a space of it's better to have depth than it is just to have visibility, just to have spectacle, right?
A lot of the conversations we're having with clients at the moment around AI tend to focus on efficiency. But in doing so, I feel what you're describing is that we're removing friction that actually adds value to an experience.
Absolutely.
And so we almost need to be thinking about, not almost in the UX, how do we make it frictionless, and actually how do we make it frictionless where it needs to be and create friction where
Absolutely. Friction is a feature. I'm quoting Zoe Scammon there.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, it's a deeply held human bias, right? Scarcity. When something is scarce, we see it as having higher value. So we've been working so hard on all, parts of the consumer journey to reduce friction, to make it easier. But in many ways, there's the bias that we have in our minds that when things are really easy, they're less valuable. So, it's why we've seen this return to exclusivity, wanting gate-kept experiences, not putting things online, there being a sort of badge of honor of not sharing with the wider world and, keeping it really quiet, keeping things really kind of word of mouth, because that scarcity is value. And that's just a deeply held human bias.
I'd agree with that. I'd say that access doesn't equal experience, right? If that was the case, everybody would be taking screenshots of their Amazon checkout page, right? Because Amazon's the most convenient brand in the world.
Yeah.
There was an article recently in the FT a couple of weeks ago that talks about how luxury brands, people are rejecting them because there's too much access. People can buy a bag just by clicking a link on a website, and people are like, well, if everybody can have it, then it's not a luxury good anymore. It's kind of a commodity, right? And the commodity with a huge margin. So I agree. I think, and this is where AI can bring the magic back to experiences, because it can identify those moments where it's okay to have friction. And then it's almost a case of like, well, let's make the best friction in the world. Like, how can we make this feel not kind of like two things rubbing together so it gets like hot and upsetting, but, it feels good. You want to be a part of it because it's more meaningful.
It feels so counterintuitive to the role of technology, but maybe that's the point. Okay, so this has been our first edition of Keeping It Real with Nuevo, and we've been excited to host you here today. We hope you've enjoyed the content. We've covered a number of really exciting topics across bringing experiences to life in the age of AI. We're going to continue this journey and bring new editions of this subject matter to life in future episodes. But for now, I would like to say thank you for watching and say goodbye from Rich.
Bye.
And goodbye from Karen.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
And it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
See ya.
Okay. I thought it was cheesy, but we'll go with it.